Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Just trying to sort my machine out. So that's better. Yeah, I just find it uncomfortable when no one talks to me. It seems most peculiar. Right, this is the last of the a series of events on barrier busting. Barrier busting is one of these kind of frustrating things in that DCMS started work on it probably more than 2 years ago now, and came up with a lot of very, very good answers. And we're still at a point where if you get more than about 2 telecoms professionals together, they start talking about wayleaves within a few minutes. It's just one of those things. And if you start talking about 2025 agenda, they definitely start talking about wayleaves and street works and planning and all the other things. So we're starting to look at the different issues. Now, this is, like I say, this is the last of a series of events that we'll be looking at it. And we're going to look at some of the final issues of planning this afternoon before we go to a break. And then the key thing that we want to do is we've got a fairly significant panel of operators. And what we'd like to do after the break is really sort of open up a debate amongst those operators and others on terms of, okay, what actually needs to happen? What are the next steps? Because, as I say, we have this 2025 timescale that's looming up on us very, very rapidly, and we need to do whatever we can to increase the pace and scale of deployment of networks. And the barrier busting is a key part of that. I will hand over soon to Grace. Grace, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Oh, good, thanks. So I'm not Tom Rainsford, as you've probably noticed. Unfortunately, Tom couldn't join the call and he sends his apologies. So from DCMS, we've got myself, so I'm head of telecoms regulatory policy. On access issues, I engage with Ofcom quite regularly on the duct and pole access remedy on OpenReach. I'm also leading our review of the access to infrastructure regulations. So that's just on my background. We've also got Talia Adelman on the call, who's one of the barrier busters and works mostly on the new build policy. So just to flag at the moment that we'll set out what Tom was due to speak to you about. So an overview of the work we've done so far since FTIR, and also a sort of request to you for further actions government could or should be taking on planning issues. Me and Talia will try our best to answer any questions you have, but if there's anything that we can't, then we're very happy to pass that back to the team as well. So just an overview, since the FTIR was published in July 2018, the barrier busters have done a number of projects since then and taken forward different work areas. So we've got the TILP, the Telecoms Infrastructure Leasehold Property Bill, currently going through Parliament. That's due in the Lords report stage next Monday on the 29th. On new build connectivity, we've published the government response to that in March and set out that we plan to amend the building regulations to mandate connectivity to new build properties. And we've also got including OpenReach, Virgin and Keep to contribute to the cost of connecting new homes. On streetworks, so I'm sure you're aware, the 4th edition of the SROH, the Specification of Reinstatement of Openings in the Highways, was brought in a few months ago, and also Street Manager is due to go live next Wednesday on the 1st of July, which aims at leading to greater standardisation across local authorities. And then most recently as well, we've just published a call for evidence on the access to infrastructure regulations. So that was published on the 12th of June and is open until the 4th of September. So we're quite keen to ask the views on how the regulations could be improved to encourage greater infrastructure sharing. But I think as well, we'd also like to use that call for evidence on access and infrastructure sharing more generally. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at that and to respond as well. So that's a sort of brief overview about some of the actions we've been taking. So I think Tom wanted really to come here today and say that actually we're in a place now where we're thinking about further reforms that government could take and further options to look at. So I think really I'm quite keen to pass it over to people on the call to ask what their views are on what government should be looking at next, as it were, and happy to sort of take any questions you've got as well. So I don't know if is there a Q&A? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, the intention is that we will have a Q&A, a brief Q&A before we go to the break after we've had the presentations. Basically, that's just to give people time to get themselves sorted out and work out how the Q&A works. So if there are any specific questions, excuse my dog.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. That's a dog called Harmony. Whoever thought of calling her Harmony just had a sense of humour that was just out of line. Right. So, Talia, was there anything more that you wanted to sort of present at this stage, or are you open just to Q&A?
No, I think Grace was sort of summed up quite neatly what the sort of the key areas the barrier busters are working on here in DCMS, and as she says, very happy to take questions and certainly very interested to hear about other measures that we should be looking at as we are sort of making some decent progress on the sort of the first wave of things we looked at. So very keen to hear about what we should be looking at in the future.
Okay, now I'm aware that you're available with us until about 3 o'clock, is that right? Yeah, okay. What we will do is we will aim to have some Q&A directly just for you before we go to the break, just so people have a chance to do that. So if people have questions for DCMS, then enter that through either the chat or the Q&A, whichever will go. I'm sure my dog will shut up eventually. So if we can do that, what will happen also is as we go through the debate later on, then we will obviously come up with a load of other sort of things for DCMS, and we'll be passing those on as a sort of part of the overall development of our barrier busting efforts. So for the moment then, shall we go to Phil from Hellman Titan, looking at the issues of ducting?
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gents. I actually work for the Gabocom side of Hellman Titan, where our speciality is microducts and passive connectivity protection. The title of this kind of ad hoc slide set is addressing some underground PIA challenges. This is from the perspective of a materials manufacturer, and from experience having gone out for the last year into the streets and supervised some installations and run some best practice hands-on training on fiber cable blowing in the PIA environment. So we all are, I guess, familiar with what PIA is. This slide set is going to be mercifully free of any commercial or political aspects of all of this. So it's just looking at some top tips for addressing PIA underground asset challenges. So basically, industry, including representatives such as INCA, have lobbied successfully over many years to force Openreach, the incumbent underground asset operator, if you like, to open up to duct and pole space for alternative network suppliers to do minimally intrusive new trench work in order to reach the customers that they want to sign up. So a great success in terms of making that happen. It's been not an easy struggle. So everywhere in the country, effectively Openreach ducts and poles are accessible, except of course in Kingston upon Hull for historical reasons. So forgive me if I'm teaching people who already sort of been in the business for a while what some of the terminology is. Ofcom calls the arrangement duct and pole access. Openreach and AltNet community calls it PIA, originally passive and now physical infrastructure access. So the theory is that given the ongoing retirement and recovery of old multi-pair copper cables from spine ducts, these are the 90mm bore ducts, the available space within 90mm bore main ducts should be increasing over time. Indeed, in the last Ofcom strategic review, it was noted that 63% of the ends of 90mm ducts had about 42% on average of unoccupied space, theoretically available for other operators to pull in cables or subduct. So in theory, access to Openreach assets leads to minimally invasive new civils on the part of the communications providers. This is an important term, the CP, within the whole process, resulting in efficiency gains in the rate of connections to customer premises. In other words, where there is a region already served by Openreach ducts, then this should minimize road closures and other mess and upset and expense. However, there are many challenges. What we're going to look at here is just the challenges of a physical nature based on installation teaching, rather than on the BT Openreach portal process, which is the heavyweight electronic system used for ordering and ceasing PIA leases. So basically, the specifications which cover
Phil,
PIA then.
Phil,
Yep.
I don't want to interrupt, but are you supposed to be sharing your screen at this point?
Am I what, sorry?
Are you supposed to be sharing your slides at this point? Do you have slides that you're using now?
Am I going to be sending the slides?
Are you using the slides?
Yes.
They're not being shared. You need to share your screen.
Sorry, am I not sharing?
No, you've
do.
got away with it so far.
Oh,
but you're getting to the point where we need to see the slides.
I do apologise. I'm a bit of a Zoom novice, so forgive me there.
Green button at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I've just pressed that. Is anybody seeing?
No, then you should get a choice of screens to share. Choose the one.
I'm with you. Yeah, stand by.
Press share. That's it.
Ah. Right.
And if you go to slideshow.
Yeah, here we go. Right, so can you see?
Yeah, that's
excellent. Good. In full Panavision, great stuff. So I'm not going to labour the points already made, other than to show you some diagrams of what PIA is all about. So I'll pick up from here if that's okay. So yes, the idea is that wherever Openreach has a duct presence in the neighbourhood, then we should be able to avoid new trench digging and mess and street closure impediments, and pull our products straight through the Openreach ducts and branch off either using a BT Openreach leading duct or a horizontal drill of some kind or a horizontal trench to get to the customer premises demarcation point. I can give a lot of advice on available tools and plant for all of this after the slideshow. So you know, I'm happy to share our experiences with operators and contractors. So yeah, this presentation is all about really some of the physical challenges in the underground PIA situation. So I think this is where I left off. Specifications. These are the main specifications covering the physical aspects of what we're talking about. The main specification is actually the very large 146-page Openreach document known as PIA product description. This is currently at the April 2020 issue, and it's very, very frequently updated in the light of hopefully smoother processes and easier interface via the web on the part of the CP, the communications provider. A very dense document, but it's essential reading for anybody who's about to join the PIA club, as it were. The things that interest us as a manufacturer of subduct, microduct bundles and microducts is CP7 is the main one for what they call a subduct in OpenReach speak, which is of a 25mm nominal diameter. And this is the basis of subduct space charging under the PIA underground system. They specify in CP7 that it has to be smooth sheathed and of circular cross-section. This is a bit strange because, of course, a lot of stuff that OpenReach themselves are putting into their ducts are certainly not circular cross-section, they're more of an elliptical cross-section, but we digress. As far as the spec is concerned, although round sheathed 25mm bundles of microducts are not covered in CP7, it's generally accepted that such configurations are classed as subduct for the purposes of space leasing. So we can, de facto, we're applying the CP7 to bundles of microducts with a 25mm maximum diameter sheath as well. Some little interesting points from CP7, and this concerns the world of blown cables and using compressors and blowing heads to get cables into the OpenReach plant. It should be noted that for installation of a fiber cable by blowing, the maximum permitted pressure is 12 bar for a single subduct. This is presumably to give a large margin of safety so that microducts are not going to burst and cause damage to adjacent CP or OpenReach assets. This can be seen as problematical in some cases. If you're using an inferior compressor, you really struggle to get more than 200 or 300 meters, 500 meters at best in some parts of central London, for example, where you have a lot of twists and turns in the routes, a lot of road crossings. What is important then is if you're going to limit the pressure to 12 bar, please select, consider selecting a very high flow rate compressor, and that you really do look after the compressor and the microducts themselves. You've got to calibrate them. That means test the continuity by blowing a projectile down to the other end. Clean them and dry them according to blown cable best practice. And it's very, very important that your compressor is fitted with a regularly maintained aftercooler with an oil and particle filter that you change frequently, and a pressure regulator to make sure you're not exceeding that 12 bar limit. So your high flow rate compressor with a really good aftercooler and filters, very important. Important safety tip here, always use a proper air stone, that is a catcher at the far end of the microduct when you're sending down these steel calibration ball chains and the cleaning sponges themselves. Of course, when you get to the end of a blown fiber route, the pressure reduces back to ambient, and of course the airflow then is at its maximum. So effectively your microduct can be a very effective air gun if it's not properly stopped with an air stone catcher at the far end. I've seen some pretty awful catchers made from plastic drinking bottles and so on that just not right. It's not best practice. Just on microduct selection, if you like, some microduct bundles are manufactured using water soluble tape and or an aluminium foil wrap in order to maintain the circular cross section required under CP7. In our view, these are not necessary because our HDPE polymer material is intrinsically chemically inert. It doesn't need those wraps for circularity. Indeed, what we do to avoid using those is we have an extrusion system called calibrated sheath, which makes the 2mm thick wall or sheath of the bundle come out circular from the actual extrusion head. So we don't need those cost up additional materials in the bundle. These are some random examples of these 25mm microduct bundles. The different sizes of microducts according to whether you're going to branch off a customer drop or continue to connect the spine along a street. It's probably well known now that most quality cable manufacturers are making cables with 200 micron diameter fiber. It used to be very expensive because the yield of this thin coated fiber was very low, but now it's becoming more commoditized pricing. The upside of these 200 micron fibers is that you can make cables with a very high fiber count for a very small diameter effectively. So for example, for these 5mm microducts, you can get a 1 to actually 24. There are some bundles of 24 fibers that are not much more than 2.6mm outside diameter. So 5, 3.5 or 7mm for customer drops. In a 10/8, that's 10 outside, 8mm outside diameter, you can get up to a 192 fiber spine mini cable. And with a 1210, as in a proposed one that we have coming up. You can get a 288 fiber spine mini cable down there. So this is all based on 200 micron fiber that's reaching the market from the likes of Corning, AFL, OFS, and so on. So an awful lot of bandwidth, if you like, in a very small space. That's the story there. The other specification that concerns us for underground is blown fiber tubing. So BFT, or blown fiber tubing, is OpenReach's term for what we call microducts. Now under CP9, presumably because we're talking about smaller products, if you like, which have a maximum diameter of 19 millimeters, they put a 10 bar limit on the pressure that's introduced by the compressor and blowing head into the microduct. So again, this can be more troublesome again if you've got these undulating duct routes with lots of multiple gradients and road crossings and sharp turns in the footway chambers as you turn around the street to turn left or right along a route. So again, select compressors with good airflow and all of the necessary accessories already described, and observe microduct commissioning best practice. Now, this is something which we deliver on a one-day basis for contractors at no cost at all. We call it Cascade or Train the Trainer training. But better still is to go to some of the, one of the very high quality training establishments in the UK, which will award vocational tickets such as City and Guilds and so on. And you get a proper accreditation and diploma that way. And that's typically a 5-day course. Many of these training companies will do a bespoke training syllabus based on the kind of plant on which the contractors are going to be working. Another tip is to use intermediate chambers for midpoint or mid-span blowing in order to get your desired distance in integers of around sort of 400 or 500 meters at a time. That means you've got to fleet out, as it were, fleet out the cable at the midpoint, store it cleanly and safely, and then blow it onwards from the midpoint to the next chamber along your desired route. So by a series of midpoint blows, there is effectively, theoretically, no limit to distance really for a route. It's probably better to use an automatic fleeting system. It keeps the cable cleaner and more efficiently rosetted, if you like, than traditional figure of 8 laying on what could be dirty ground. They are expensive, but they will ensure a good blowing because the cable going into the microduct at the midpoint is clean and dry and ready to be jetted in there. So there's a little diagram of what we mean by midpoint blowing, and there's the fleeting machine. Also, after you've done the blow from the midpoint, use very high quality close downs with a lot of physical robustness, because there's every danger that in an open reach footway chamber that's shared by every operator under the sun, there's every risk of a size 9 boot being unkindly depressed onto your precious microduct and the fiber cable within it. So you need some robust close downs. Better still is to, and indeed it's actually mandated within the open reach specs, that you've got to use a quality, a robust tube distribution closure to keep your joints and connections safe and sound. Again, under CP9, select thick wall, that is direct bury type microducts with a 2 millimeter wall thickness. Remember, this is a 19 millimeter product. You really need a product that will be that will have better tolerance to pulling into a long duct route than the traditional thin wall microducts that are found within direct install bundles. So direct bury microducts in the open reach duct under the CP9 variety. Very important there. And also consider selecting microducts which are manufactured from a low friction HDPE compound throughout, rather than a low friction lined product, which can be abraded by subsequent blow out, blow in upgrades on the routes. You know, you can get deteriorated blowing performance if some of the low friction lining is being rubbed out of the system effectively. So for the 19 millimeter maximum BFT or microduct size, what can you get out of that? The useful bandwidth within this limitation can be realized using these 1612 or 1814 direct bury microducts. And you can get a 432 fiber and a 588 fiber cable through that size, which is really, really useful. Fiber count, a lot of redundancy, and also a lot of asset that could be effectively rented out as dark fiber to other operators who are sending over the top services above your physical layer, as it were. So the new 5x8 fiber mini cable, if you like, from OFS, it's only 9.6 millimeter outside diameter, which is incredible. And this is coming out of the use of 200 micron fibers and minimal strength members, bearing in mind that these are blown rather than pulled, so you don't need a whacking great fiberglass strength member in the center of these products nowadays. Another tip then, as part of your material selection process for underground PIA, consider suppliers that have a customer accessible blown fiber test track. So a good modular test track will be IEC compliant and have the ability to extend linear routes as required for proof and demonstration purposes through, if you like, tromboning or making U-bends on multiple microducts in one or more bundles using direct very straight connectors. And this will allow you to put on some of the bend radii as you might find within your target surveyed area for the build. So you can emulate and anticipate what sort of blowing challenges you get by building the route on a tame test track rather than going first day one out into the streets and doing it. So this typical test track, it's only 100 meters linear distance, limited by the site that we have, yet by tromboning we can multiply the route significantly. We've got gradients as well to emulate road crossings where you're going from, say, a footway chamber just down to the 450 millimeter minimum depth for a road crossing. Other common challenges, as many participants of INCA will know, BT OpenReach records and street plans are not generally up to date. They're not sanitized. You know, there are jointing chambers not appearing on plans because they've been historically tarmacked over or grassed over or what have you, and not seen in a survey. And ducts which are agreed to be available to altnets are already full. We get a lot of silt and water blockages as well. We've got jammed pulling ropes or no ropes left in at all. And of course, re-rodding the duct in order to pull a new draw rope through it's wasted time and energy. So, you know, unfortunately, it's a fact of life. We just got to know that these are typical challenges that will be encountered. We get a lot of collapsed ducts, especially the older non-PVC, the terracotta and other ceramic type routes in rural regions. This is a particular problem in rural Scotland at the moment as well in particular. So a tip, employ the very best survey and remedial teams you can afford, or select a reputable PIA partner, and we're going to hear from one shortly afterwards, you know, with many person-years of experience in this field, equipped with all the latest toys and tools, gadgets, planning systems, smartphone apps. As you see there, there's a smartphone there with a PIA route diagram showing twists and turns, swept tees and jointing chambers and what have you. So the toppest tip of all, as of May 2020, I'm sure this is common knowledge now within our INCA community, the Department for Transport has at last approved micro-trenching as a minimally intrusive and fast technique for laying underground utility assets. So issue 4 came out last month. A new section 6.6 defines a micro-trench in terms of permitted dimensions. And the appendix has a series of technical specifications for the reinstatement material and the anti-skid top finish. This is a very efficient technique, and if it's done properly, it will allow your assets to remain protected for a good 50 years. Crucially, according to issue 4, then no local authority may any longer refuse a micro-trenching application without very good reason. So the tip here is to save money on OpenReach PIA where possible by considering micro-trenching in the highway for your spine route. Ideally, this would be done by an open network kind of operator who would be making available fiber bandwidth, if you like, to a mixture of over-the-top service providers, because you don't want multiple micro trenches in the same street, of course. So cooperation is needed in this kind of environment. So select a microduct manufacturer with the appropriate materials and good connections with tool and plant partners. That, I believe, ladies and gents, is the top and bottom of it. So I'm happy to take questions by chat or offline after the event.
We'll save the questions until later.
Yeah.
Where of time? 25 to.
Stop share.
Grace, Talia, are you still with us? Yes, you're still
Yeah.
there.
Yes, we are
There
here.
is one specific question, if you wouldn't mind. And I'm directing it to you because, if I'm honest, I don't know what it means. It's from Will Osborne, and with regards to part 16 and consultation with MHCLG, what is the current situation?
So I'm going to take this to refer to the mobile planning consultation. If I've misunderstood, please shout. So obviously the consultation closed a few months ago, and the team here have been sort of working on sort of going through consultation responses and agreeing next steps with MHCLG. I'm afraid it was one of the pieces of work that fell victim to the need to remobilise people to deal with the COVID fallout. So it has been set back a bit, but they are working on it. And if you want any sort of further information or to talk to the team, I can do that sort of offline.
Okay, that's fine. Well, perhaps that's something that we can discuss at the end of the event today and decide how what needs to be done to progress that.
Great, thank you. I don't know whether you can hear me or not.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it was just a question I thought I'd raise at that point in case there was any update or response. I didn't want to take up the rest of the presentation.
Okay.
By butting, although I just butted in, so I apologise again.
Not to worry, that's great. Thank you very much. Right, Stuart, shall we move on to your presentation then, please?
Okay, thank you, James. Let me just go and get the share screen right. And while I'm doing that, thank you, Phil, for the nice little segue introduction there. Appreciate that. So, can we just, before we move on, can you see?
Yep, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so, oh, sorry, a little message come up there. Is that you, James, sending me a message? So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to INCA and the team for offering the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Stuart Pert, I'm Account Director at Flowmatic Network Services. Some of you are aware of Flowmatic, but those that aren't, so Flowmatic is a managed service company. We service the UK's telecom industry with network planning, engineering, and professional services. So today is about barrier busting and addressing some of the challenges the UK's telecom industry faces to meet investors and the government's ambitions through the coming years. I know, James, you mentioned 2025. So I'm going to focus on network planning and how you as a communication provider, or a CP as I'll probably keep referring to you, so how you can smooth that process out and support those onward build activities. So I appreciate a number of you are already established across these key stages and have already fought the fight. But for some of the new entrants, I think it's worth going through them. And just before we do that, I do hope you get something out of the session today. But if nothing else, I really hope you do take this point away: is to hit your cost per premise, to deliver on schedule and generate your model revenues. You need a quality network build. To achieve a quality network build, you need quality network planning, and to achieve quality network planning, you definitely need quality data and a solid strategy. So you can't scrimp in these stages in sourcing the key data you need to get lined up for that quality build. Some processes are harder than others and can be time consuming, but doing the right thing here, it's going to allow you to echo through your planning and build activities to get to that quality build. So get through establishment, get through the strategy phases, and you can get the proverbial pens out and start planning. So let's start at the beginning. So to achieve a tangible planning output, a CP's got to have code pillars to operate. There's no option, it's not a barrier. It's an established process, so you just need to allow some time for the application process, the consultancy period, and any admin fees. knowing your architecture and technical specification. I know this does sound obvious, but it's the foundation that's it'll allow you to move quickly with your vendors and suppliers. Your architecture needs to be clear, it needs to be flexible, and using recognized industry standards will help. I know James and I both spoke about GPON standards, what have you. It's just using those standard industry pieces that they will help. Your architecture, it will take a few short weeks to document, but it will remain a constant working process for the duration of the build. So be ready, because things will always keep changing. Align your company with trusted and experienced partners. You'll benefit from a partner's experience, and you can't beat the lure of mutual success. Partners will help you avoid making some of those mistakes that your competitors have already made. Then we have the PIA establishment process, certainly commonly viewed as a barrier, but I'll pick up on PIA a little bit later. So you're established. So as a CP, you've got to be clear on where you're going and what your target communities are. Choose your initial town, either by way of a trial or a pilot. Purchase quality and purchase quality map and premise data, which is difficult for me to say, apologies. Planning at scale and to a consistent level of accuracy is difficult to do with open source mapping. Ordnance survey products provide the accuracy and the layers of data your planning partner needs to generate your planning outputs. That, you know, it's just starting at the right point. Identify your POP or your backhaul interconnect as quickly as possible, because everything's going to stem from this location. When you commence planning, it's one of the fixed reference points for your architecture. If that changes at any point, and you know, it is a difficult thing to nail down, if that changes the impact, it does ripple through all of the planned network or how much work you've already got underway. And you need to understand what you need from a GIS system. You know, I know at times the cost of an inventory system can be quite inhibitive, but you know, you may well need that further down the line as you grow. So it all really depends on scale and tracking your inventory. So decide what you need from the outset. So things like Flowmatic use, you know, systems like QGIS that offers a fast start and a cost-efficient platform to generate network planning outputs, lets you get moving and get those build packs out to your build partners. We then have the dreaded PIA data that Phil mentioned also. It's well proven to be inaccurate and it's very unreliable. Processing PIA data can be very slow and manual, definitely seen as a barrier. But again, you know, I will touch on PIA a bit later. So now you've got your rich source of map data. You're quite clear on your you are clear on your architecture. You've selected some key communities and you've sourced PIA. So you've now got enough to start planning. Excuse me. So planning starts at high level. That allows you to define your core network and the area breaks up that are aligned to your architecture and also your POP or your interconnect. Highlighting special engineering difficulties, or SEDs as we refer to them. Early in the process, it's really important to you and your partners. Some of those crucial negotiations can get started really quickly with bodies such as Network Rail, Environment Agency, or the local authority themselves. Early ID offers you time to arrive at an agreed solution. And that could, the good thing about that is if you can incorporate that into your low-level network planning, it saves you basically addressing the system late and then having to update and revise plans. So try to do these things as early as you can is really good. Resurfacing programs and a local authority's commitment to HOT guidelines. That seems to be an issue, certainly for some CPs more than others. So these disputes that sort of come up, they can be a big problem and a big problem for the relationship and generate a difficult working relationship. So using data such as geospatial SWIMS data, that can help a CP avoid or minimize issues as that SWIMS data holds strategic street information. So known as streets adopted status, its ownership, or if the street's restricted, or if it's traffic sensitive, and even if it's under Section 58, it's really quite powerful information to know early in the process, because that allows your planning partner to use that information strategically, and you can avoid problematic build areas, or you can highlight streets that are under private ownership. And that will support early engagement for your wayleave teams, again, as James offered before. And you can also procure additional data sets such as land registry or the engagement, or even engage an outsourced planning partner. So that's also going to ID these wayleave issues early. Being aware of particular areas of concern early in the process not only provides the time and the approach, and allows you to approach property owners directly to negotiate a solution or to get that wayleave. And it may even help shape the planning and build activities, so you can work your schedule around what you know are problem areas, so allowing you to keep that flow going and keep things consistent. So you have the high level planning in place, so that's followed up very quickly by the low level plan, and that can commence to get you your outputs that you've agreed with your build partner. So this is where we as a planning company, we tackle the detail and the challenges of your selected towns head on. Our teams, they immerse themselves in the detail of existing infrastructure and the makeup of the streets. This is all done with detailed technical site surveys, reviewing the records and data provided, and we need to make sure that any network planning proposals are based on validated information. So civils drawings, fibre splice schedules, fibre SLDs, premise data, and bills of material. These are all the outputs and the documentation that's produced at this low-level planning stage, and that's what your build teams need. So delivering network planning isn't without its issues. PIA use introduces additional complexity to the process. So finally, let's take a wee look at the PIA piece and some of its challenges. So PIA can be difficult to grapple with when you first get involved with it, but as you get to use it, and I think a lot of you CPs out there, once you use it, once you get a system in place, you can come to terms with it, and it becomes usable. And in truth, we all want a secure and robust infrastructure that we can all rely on. So the establishment process is there to ensure that you as an applicant, you've got the correct measures and policies in place to operate as a responsible company. And you can share that infrastructure with other operators. It's not intended to make life difficult. You need to allow sort of 12 to 16 weeks to get through this process. And you need to make sure your policies, your business policies, your insurances are all in place, your workforce is accredited, and you need to be ready for that 10K bond or deposit. So, and on that, the Openreach teams that are assigned to support you through this process, they do tend to be advocates, and on the CP side, going through the establishment process. I'm not aware, and most companies I speak to are quite positive about this. They're there to support you, and I don't think any companies really feel that they're not supported through that initial stage. So it's not as difficult or not as painful as people first thought. But the main challenge from a planning perspective for PIAs is access and the accuracy of the Openreach data. Without a doubt, it's true the data isn't great, and this has got to be addressed. And I think moving into the next few years, if CPs are going to go head to head with BT, bidding for lots under the government's initiatives with outside in, or I'm not too sure what it's called at the moment, but the access to accurate, usable data, it's got to be fair for everyone. So if this is open and available, the CP should have the same level of information. And we can see that impact, how difficult it was through the R100 and Stratum programs. That I wouldn't necessarily suggest that it was as a level playing field in that sense with reference to information available. So the standard approach for a CP is to access and download pockets of data from the portal. As I said before, it's very slow, it's hydraulic, with the only geo-reference data being the point data. So the line information in between the points, when I say points, I mean the poles and chambers. But the line information that links these, which, let's face it, is quite important in the scheme of things, it's of poor quality, and to be honest, it's almost useless for GIS processing. So the game changer here is accessing the Vordal gateway data. So the Vordal data provides the geo-reference line data required to automate and accurately generate planning packs and outputs, because that holds sufficient GIS attributes to support high-level analysis and any modelling that you're doing. So the only way your planning partner or teams can accurately validate PIA PIA data is to survey. And, and getting boots on the ground early is absolutely crucial. And in fact, the volume of survey activity increases dramatically when a CEP uses PIA. In fact, survey activities can double, sometimes even treble, depending on the use case that you're looking at. And this is why, Flowmatic, we're always looking for ways to improve and the delivery of PIA network planning. Trying to reduce delivery timelines is fairly obvious, but accessing accurate supplementary data to BT's data, and we can do that with maybe some of our planning partner companies like Geist or MK Surveys, that could maybe provide an early indication of available capacity. And it's also why we introduce joint walkouts to the majority of our clients building FTTX networks. So we recognize the risk our clients face in committing to PIA consumption. And we're open to sharing, our planners' interpretations of the infrastructure and how we've arrived at the proposals before we commit those final plans. So going to site before the planning process is complete with our client and with the build partner, all of those guys being on site with the technical survey teams, it generates a common understanding and hopefully mitigates some of that risk through the subsequent build phases. So UG infrastructure, it certainly brings a higher level of uncertainty when relying on the open reach records. And it's very common for the RAG status to be incorrect, leading to the only option for a CP being the rodding and roping. So incorporating rodding and roping into the deployment phase and managing network adjustments, all of those things are wrapped up in the PIA process. It can be complex and quite time consuming. But I think compared to the cost to build and realising savings in excess of, 35%, it looks like the additional overhead appears to be worth it. But there is still plenty of room for improvement. And I think it was mentioned earlier, but I think with the latest call for evidence from the Digital Infrastructure Minister, and it's Matt Warman, it looks like we won't be restricted to only using BT's infrastructure. The rest of the UK's utility networks may be a step closer to being opened up. So as our industry matures, I think what was referred to as barriers are slowly transitioning to be challenges and processes. Some good, some difficult to negotiate, and some are quite costly. But the great work that INCA is doing, and with everybody here's support, we'll maintain pressure on the DCMS, on Ofcom, and not forgetting BT. We'll keep changing and improving, and we have to keep all of these things high on our agendas. Thank you very much.
Stuart, thank you very much indeed.
Sure.
It would be really helpful, I think, because we have got some of our sort of real expert operators and sort of operator partners here, to just perhaps go through, and if you could very quickly just say how do we want to do this? What are the 3 biggest barriers you think that need to be fixed in terms of time? The key thing that we want to think about here is we want to deliver gigabit broadband to everyone by 2025. That is a massive challenge. So we've got to start thinking about everything that we can do to do that. So let's start by prioritizing amongst you operators, what is it that we can do? Now, just to make this simpler, well, simpler for me anyway, we'll take it by the order that you are on my screen. Unfortunately, of course, you actually can't see my screen, so that's no help to you. But let's just say that Stephen Terry is first, and then it's going to be Evan, and then we'll go from there. So, Stephen, apologies, almost no warning there. What to you would be the key things that are causing barriers at the moment that you think can be addressed?
Okay. Well, the first thing for me is I've got 4.
Go on then. We'll let you have 4.
there's 2 reasons for that. One is we are heavy users of the PIA product. So 3 of mine are directed along the lines of consumption of the PIA product and the help of the OTA and OpenReach. The other one I've got is actually more related to BD UK, and again, the timing issue. So if I go through the three product ones, the three product challenges for me right now are the Network Adjustment Fund, as-built closures. We've overcome some of the issues with closing down jobs. We've closed hundreds, but we've still got some niggling problems, which kind of feeds into what Stuart Pert said earlier with regards to the records. If you get problems with records, trying to close down the jobs, you can't actually close your jobs down. There were some system problems, there were some training issues at Openreach, they've overcome those ones. But what we get, others get later, because we've been fairly front leading on a number of things on this product. The billing is another one. We will need some more robust automation and management of billing. So those two are kind of two of the three I said. The network adjustment one, that has a history that goes back to 2016. We started trying to consume the product in 2016 and blockages became an issue immediately. We fed into the OTA and to Ofcom at the time, our issues with regards to the number of blockages we were hitting. And at that time we had to pay to repair them ourselves. And so we did, we got on and did that, whilst also pushing the fact that it seemed wrong to have to pay to repair an asset that you want to rent. Ofcom, the OTA, very supportive. It went into the WMLR of 2017, and in that, Ofcom recognised under section 7.77, not that I can remember it, that network adjustments were a key item, and they ultimately built that in as a regulatory requirement with the product when it was relaunched in 2019. The reason I'm banging on about that one is I'm still not realising the reality of it. So I believe since April 2019, I've got about 500 blockages on the jobs that I've done, but I'm still struggling to realise the cash. So that one is right up there, and it plays on you know, the other conversation around vouchers, because vouchers and network adjustments are the way you can overcome the connectivity costs of connecting people, as opposed to just necessarily building network. Coming back to the very last one, BD UK, with their own timelines, you know, they've got a very difficult job to do here, and to distribute the 5 billion, I think everyone realises that's going to be in various pots of money. It's not going to just be one fund. You know, you're going to need lots of tools in order to get the job done. The concept of levelling out, I don't think it's quite as simple as the last F20. I think it's F20, F15, F10, F5, F1, and each one of those is going to require a slightly different tool or certainly a different level of funding. I'm very strong on vouchers. I like the idea of vouchers because it puts the power in the customer's hands, the customer to determine who they want to use, and then altnets, major players can actually use that to their advantage to overcome some of those connection costs. I think this is a personal view, I think it could have been a whole lot easier by having different levels of vouchers relative to the city, urban edge and rural situations. So if that was realised and the vouchers increased relative to connectivity difficulty, that would certainly go a long way to help.
Okay. Interesting. We will start to discuss that later because there's quite a few bits to pick out of there. But let's keep going through. Evan, your big points, please.
Yeah, pretty much. Agree with pretty much everything that Stephen has said. I just want to add a few more bits to that. I know you said at the beginning that we would talk about wayleaves, because that's what we would do, because it's part of what we do. One of the things that would be very interesting to explore is the use of grandfather right wayleaves, where if you are going to use somebody else's infrastructure, then that infrastructure wayleave permits you onto the land to crack on and use the infrastructure that's there. So if you're going to use poles, for instance, then you should be able to use those poles with a courtesy letter to the landowner rather than to go into negotiations right from the beginning. So the negotiation process on these way leaves is such that actually by the end of by the time you finish negotiating and time wasting, you might as well just have put it in the road in the first place, or built your own infrastructure. So it does slow it down, and it's a pain. And frankly, where and you know, we've seen, I think a lot of people don't actually have any way leave agreements with the current infrastructure providers that are there anyway. So BT have got a lot of plant in people's land where they haven't got a way leave agreement with people. If you want to use the PIA, then you have to get another way leave, and it's, you know, BT are using that as a way of slowing down delivery. So that's one of them. The other thing I think that needs to be considered, and it needs to be talked about every single time we talk about what's going to come with the 5 billion, is the manner in which that money is in fact distributed to build network. In other words, if BT as Ofcom are proposing get the lion's share of that money because they apparently can do it quicker than the outlets can, then BT at the moment are telling everybody willy-nilly that they're going to overbuild all the networks anyway. And my point from government would be back to BT, well, if you're telling us you're going to overbuild all the networks anyway, then you can do it with your own money. You don't need any of ours. Okay, and I think that's an important thing. It's not just moaning or griping, but it's a very important piece here, that if BT had their way, they would change their prices differently depending on where the competition was, and they would also spend their own cash on overbuilding where competition was, and then ask for government money to build where there wasn't any competition. And I suspect I want to see a process where if BT are getting billions from the government to build where there is no competition, then they shouldn't get any money at all if they're going to overbuild where there is, at least for a number of years, to encourage that stuff to be built quickly. Now, I might not have made my point quite clearly. This is all about building quickly. And if BT are going to spend effort overbuilding where there already is networks or networks being delivered, then it's not about building quickly anymore. And if it's building quickly is what the government wants, then they ought not to give BT any funding if that's what they're going to do. For instance, if I was overbuilding BT in the cities that I want to build to, when they have FTTP, and I'm saying I need extra cash because I'm very poor and I can't do it in the areas where you want me to go to, they should turn around to me and say, no, just concentrate on going to the areas that we want you to go to, and spend our money quickly and put all your efforts into spending our money in the areas that we want you to deliver to, rather than continue delivering overbuild in situ. I'd like just a nod of the heads if people understand what I've said there, because it's not uncomplicated, but it can be made complicated in language. And those really are two major issues. And we've got other issues that are about unfair competition, unfair taxing, unfair rates, all that kind of crap. But it's all the normal stuff that if you wanted to focus on building quickly and getting this thing done, then the government should be focusing on encouraging as much build as they possibly can, and not turning a blind eye to poor practices elsewhere. We've also seen other things with OpenReach poaching, shall we say, PIA away from people who are requesting it. And I'd be interested to see if anybody else has seen any evidence of that across the piece.
Well, I want to stop you on that one.
Yeah.
Well, not stop you. I almost want to just kind of almost pause and start you again later. That's one of the things that we are effectively trying to serve a call for evidence on that. So
it's one of the
amongst ourselves, tell anybody else you know, communicate it as widely as possible. If anyone's having any issues with regard to OpenReach, as you put it quite nicely, I think, poaching PIA, then we want to know. We want to know in as much detail as we can, because it's perceived as being a problem, but there is very little tangible evidence of it. But it's one of those things, everyone knows it's happening, but no one's given the evidence. So let's get the evidence and see if we can stop it.
Right. That's me.
Excellent. John.
I shall preface what I say by emphasising I've got quite a parochial view. I serve the Isle of Wight and the Isle of Wight only, but the Isle of Wight's recently proving its mettle as a test bed for new things, such as the NHS track and trace app, which of course has now been abandoned. But let's not hope our full fibre rollout gets abandoned in the same way. I know it won't. We're doing very well. We're 20,000 homes into a 70,000 home rollout. I mean, three things. Streetworks goes without saying. We have an unusual situation on the Isle of Wight where the roads authority is a PFI between the local authority, only a single local authority, so that's positive. But we have a profit-making commercial enterprise responsible for running the roads on the island, and something like 70% of the main roads on the island have a Section 58 on them, and 40% of the footways. So that has presented us with very unique problems. But you know, local authority hasn't signed up to the Streetworks toolkit, doesn't have any enthusiasm for doing so, and beyond the PFA, beyond the PFI and Section 58 issues, traffic noticing is very problematic for us. We have some very long lead times in some difficult road junctions in being able to build. Secondly, way leaves always gets mentioned, but specifically some, you know, in some areas as high as 25%, even in a place like the Isle of Wight, and typically, you know, 15% or more of premises are MDUs, which require internal cabling in order to be able to serve them. And that for us is proving a very slow process. So, you know, we don't claim a home passed until we can actually serve it. And so it's a very slow process getting way leaves and permission to go and actually distribute fibre or some sort of solution inside the building. And then the third point, which is a failing on our part and a learning for us from the last couple of years, is you know, some contractors need more management than others. So some contractors, you give them a task order and off they go and build the area broadly within the timeline that they said, leaving some bits behind that are Section 58, maybe some late finishes down to definitely some late finishes down to the traffic noticing. But others just don't deliver, and the level of supervision that we need to put on the ground to ensure that they do so has taken us by surprise, and we hadn't budgeted for it. So those are my three challenges: Streetworks and wayleaves, specifically on MDUs, should be no surprise to everyone else. And then I guess some learning from the first couple of years of our project around contractor management.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just keep moving on. For some reason, the images have all moved around on my screen, but I'm hoping the orders stay the same, in which case, Mike Quinn.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to cover more or less the same areas because they are common to all of us. So the areas of highways, streetworks, PIA, and wayleaves. But the context for me is these are as much barriers as dependencies on our delivery programs, and managing dependencies really requires some degree of consistency and predictability in how they will be pan out in practice. The concern I have is the inconsistency that you often see between different local authority highways departments, both in terms of their approach and attitude and application of the regulations, but also in their internal capabilities. Some highways authority departments are very efficient and well run and well resourced. Others are less so. And when you're working with a local authority highway department that is under resourced, it becomes very difficult to maintain efficient workflow and production of results. Similar to John's situation on the Isle of Wight, where they have an outsourced private partner running highways. Some of the local authorities do that, others keep it in-house and keep it as a local authority function, which simply introduces another level of variation, which makes it more difficult to know how to work with them. PIA, I think, is a different issue in terms of data quality and data availability. I have to admit that I'm just embarking on my first venture into PIA. And one of the aspects that does concern me is that I'm one of many who are starting that journey. So there are more and more CPs registering, more and more of us learning the ropes, and therefore more and more of us getting involved. And we will all, at some point, be completing our builds and feeding data back into an imperfect system. So that could become a worsening situation if we don't fix the data management, data quality issues around that which exists now, and how we supplement that with our build complete information when we do that. Way leaves, I do think we have to move away from relying on code powers and recourse to law to overcome difficulties in way leaves and the delay that causes to our planning, and just find a more efficient way of engaging with landowners. I do think we have a responsibility, though, in this to approach from a cooperative standpoint rather than a demand standpoint. So there are ways of engaging with landowners and property owners in a positive and cooperative way, and hopefully build relationships and get the results we're looking for without falling back on our code power ability to enforce. That's me. Okay. Well, that leads very nicely on, I think, to perhaps the last two that we're going to look at. But Hector, you're next.
Hi there, everyone. And I'm probably going to harp on about very similar things to everyone else. Two certainly the same, and one perhaps slightly different. And just to continue on the Wayleaves front, we're an organisation that's almost exclusively built using landowner rural Wayleaves. We do very, very little hard dig, and so we have made a fairly efficient process for building using soft dig Wayleaves. I'm probably building about 50 kilometres a month using soft dig Wayleaves, and so we've structured our whole build process around having flexibility as to which build we go to next that allows us to put the Wayleave negotiation back onto the community at some level, saying, well, if your community hasn't helped us sort out some of the Wayleave issues in a local area, we'll push the back, and that helps to a certain extent. But I think I harped on the last one of these calls a few weeks ago about the fact that we think that we need to see the rural Wayleave process sorted and quite fundamentally changed by the beginning of next year, or there's going to be real problems in scaling rural rollout. And for us, there's sort of three angles of it. There's probably the price of the actual Wayleave on the per meter cost, and if you're building out in very, very rural areas, you're going a kilometre or two to get to 3 or 4 houses. Actually, the £4 or £3.95 a metre it adds a material cost to the construction and can make that unviable. The second is the consistency of contract, which is tied in really with the third, which is the speed and certainty of being able to get the Wayleaves. And I mean, I think luckily enough, we've got the CLA are engaged with INCA, and we're actually on the last call. And we followed up with discussions with them about opening a negotiation process led by INCA to try and review how the rural Wayleaves agreement works. And what we would love to get to is to a point where we have a standardized agreement that really landowners generally aren't the issue around Wayleaves, it's their agents that cause most of the issues. And so agents, as far as we can see, exist solely to try and add, for the Wayleave payment to be equal to their fees plus £1. As long as they do that, it doesn't really matter how long they negotiate, how long they mess everyone around for, but they've added £1 of value to the landowner. So that's where the point 2 around the consistency of contract comes in. If we had a contract which was very clear and very consistent, signed off by one of the solicitors groups that said, look, this is an agreed, approved contract, and and the CLA said, look, as far as we're concerned, operators have pretty well a right to come across under this contract as long as they take a reasonable route and you know, have an agreement, and that should hopefully speed up the consistency and certainty. And if we had that from the CLA, then there would be much less scope for agents to step in and say, hold on, we need to review the contract, and we need to take this out and look if there's more that we can have out of this. And I think that's really important, and definitely something that the CLA are on board with. I think their current stance that they've negotiated way leaves and therefore need to way leaves agreement to 2017, and therefore they can stand up and say that they're a champion of rural land access is definitely not the case, that the agreement in place isn't suitable to the scale of rollout. So that would be probably the area that we lead on, and the biggest single issue. The other probably two, one would be around consistency of funding, and I think as we're moving forward, the last few superfast contracts that have gone out have been wholly inappropriate for full fibre build, because they don't focus on rolling out contiguous areas. They focus on rolling out to people with the slower speeds, and you just can't build fibre to 3 people here and 3 people there. And I think getting the contracts appropriate and efficient, if we're talking about going into F20 for rural areas, and also with the areas of build out, is going to be really, really important in the next year. And the last one actually leads off Evan's comment, which is around Openreach taking the view that they're going to build for the whole country, and particularly Ofcom's sort of stance at the moment, which is that in Area 3, they're just going to encourage BT to overbuild, just to build their respective providers, is that we as a group need to work out how to wholesale and how to tick some of the boxes that Ofcom sees as a concern, where they see that independent networks can't interact with the rest of the broadband industry, which they consider as the majors of TalkTalk and others. And that's definitely a challenge. And we need to get to a point where we can automate our processes and all wholesale in a way that Ofcom feels is appropriate and can be consumed by the rest of the country. So those would be my points.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom, so you're smiling at 1 or 2 points about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few things to mention. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that anybody said here. I mean, there's quite clear barriers that still need to be overcome. But you've saved me to last, James, but we attack it completely differently. I mean, one of the big things, which I know that a lot of companies here will already be doing, is harnessing the community. There is nothing stronger than having that community, looking at way leaves, as we always mention, as the big one. And if you can engage early enough, actually, all of the talk around creating processes that all altnets can follow across the entire of the UK, which is absolutely fine and is needed. There are other ways right now in approaching landowners and land agents. That's the one I was laughing at, because land agents, yes, they see it, they rub their hands together. And really the landowner just wants to get on with it. But if you have your community who want this broadband service installing, there is nothing that will stop them in negotiating and talking and being involved. And if you involve the landowners at the level that is required for negotiating the route where it needs to be, nobody knows the land better than them. If you can overcome all of those things and have the community do that for you, actually, it's a distributed resource that's everywhere. There is a community everywhere in the rural parts of the UK. I mean, there's communities everywhere anyway. But what I'm saying is that when you're saying we want to go and build, and not just to the 3, we do need to be able to build to everybody in that area. It is impossible just to go to 3 that are right at the top of the valley and let somebody else deal with the village. No, you have to do it all together. It doesn't work otherwise. So if you can go in there, you have that community. We use a parish as an entity, and people still use parish and respect that. And then, the people that club together and go and see how they can go and reach those 3 at the top and negotiate the way leaves, and including everywhere in the village. And that's very powerful. And that's the way that we go about it. We have members of staff who coordinate the way leave process, but actually the negotiation is all done by the community, because they know everybody else. We give them the set of rules. Here's the set of rules that you've got to follow to be able to go and negotiate your way leaves and your routes. Fine, no problem. They can then take that as a community, which is distributed amongst all the different areas, and then they can go and talk to the landowners and start making the agreements. So that's a comment about the way leave side of things, that we found a way that works quite well, which is distributed and can quick, the process is quicker rather than going through, if somebody's grumpy, you've then got to use your code powers and go through solicitors and get yourself in there. Actually, you know, there are ways that, you know, the community can start a conversation with them all, and 9 times out of 10 they turn around and say, actually, okay, yeah, it's fine, we'll agree and we'll allow it to go ahead. That's no problem. So there's a comment there. The other side is actually when you're in the village. I mean, there's talks about streetworks and local authorities. We border on 3 different local authorities, you know, right close into where our heart of our network is, and they all have a different view. And it wasn't until the amendments came in for allowing narrow trenching, slot trenching officially, that actually some of them refused it outright, and we couldn't do anything. Now we're in a position where in all the councils that we're bordering against, we can go with a clear you know, method that is the same for each, and it is accepted now. So we're over that. You know, now when we're looking into the build phases of the next years coming, we're over some of these hurdles, I feel. You know, we're viewing it as positively as we can in how to increase, you know, how we're actually building as a rate, but also what about other altnets, you know, and their respective areas. You know, I don't know, this is the way we've been doing it, using the community quite heavily, really heavily involving them. And, you know, others will be doing the same. You know, there's nothing against that at all. But it's a case of, you know, how can we then get it so all the other areas are building at a more rapid rate together, if that makes sense. So anyway, we're just coming at it in a bit of a different way, and the communities are really quite on board with us.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. One from Will Osborne, who hopefully, if Will, you want to unmute, he should be able to talk to us.
It's more of a statement, I think, James.
Is it opening notices permits with Transport for London to proceed more quickly would be hugely beneficial? Will, I didn't know whether you wanted to put a bit more depth around that statement.
Yes, thank you. I'm from MBNL, so we the joint venture between EE and 3, and obviously we're not dealing with fibre directly, but we still put equipment within the public highway and the Docks Highway, and trying to get way leaves, code agreements, dealing with local authorities, highways authorities, and so on is very similar. And part of my background is I think I've got about 80,000 DSLAM cabinet applications against my name when I did the NGA about 10 years ago. But that's an aside. At the moment, when we're rolling out 5G and upgrading sites, going to do trial holes and connect to fibre and power, especially with TfL, we're having a huge issue in obtaining notices and permits. And throughout the country there, we've had a bit of pushback. The highways authority is not really understanding what telecoms is, what we need to do, why we need to do it, and the extent of the work we need to undertake as well, especially during the current situation where we've seen, and I'm sure everybody has, but we've seen a huge increase in suburban and residential area demand and away from city centres and places of work. So the sort of slightly quieter streets and side roads that normally don't have much activity, we're doing an awful lot of work there to improve connectivity. So I just wondered if other people have experienced the same sort of issues with the highways authorities and pushback.
I guess Stephen and Mike would probably be the obvious ones to.
Certainly TfL, we have had our problems in certain locations. So I empathise with you, because when you do get a problem with TfL, I think sometimes it can come down to an individual. So, you know, we've had suggestions where we were needing to close a dual carriageway in order to complete some works, and actually all we needed is to get a parking restriction in place. You know, so I empathise with you. It's kind of geographically where you are and down to individuals sometimes. So yeah, I recognise your issues with TfL.
Okay. I guess it's that issue of the Hawk England and consistency, isn't it? Trying to get all the local authorities the same. Evan, one thing that you mentioned was interesting. I'm not quite sure how we can consider this. Well, there are two elements here that I think are very, very interesting, and at different levels. So there's the whole sort of Wessex and Barn approach of working with communities. That looks very interesting. Has always looked very interesting and attractive. But how do we scale it up to the kind of scale that we need to deliver gigabit to everyone by 2025? And Evan, what you were talking about of almost enforced collaboration, of thou shalt not overbuild because it's just wasting time. I think that somehow intuitively feels like it has to be a good idea, but how do we work to stop that?
Okay, so 2 points to clear up. Firstly, the community approach to A-Leaves is absolutely the way to go, and you know, we do that as best we can, but we are building faster than communities are able to deal with, and it also it's a geographical thing, Tom. I think, you know, having spent time up at Barn with Chris, the community is a very different community than the communities that we're building to in and around down here in the South Bristol, Bath, sort of southwest area. We have pockets of very tight community, and we have pockets of we don't give a shit about anybody communities, and it's quite difficult. So we're trying to homogenize that process around obviously community engagement. The engagement managers that are working with the community anyway are doing that all the time, trying to get the local intelligence and talk to and get the community to do that sort of work for us. But you know, we've been doing it a long time, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work as quickly as you want. There's always a landowner whose family's had the land for 900 years and wants as much money as they can possibly do. They don't care for the communities, and are constantly causing havoc and grief. So you know, our view on Wayleaves now is that a delayed wayleave and a wayleave that's been paused by a land agent or a landowner who just constantly wants to negotiate and negotiate, not sign, and then sign and not sign, and then decide they want to do something else, then go on holiday for 6 months and come back, and you know, we've had all of that. It's simply to go, okay, we either need to go through this area and stick it in the road, and therefore save ourselves time and ultimately money because there's lost revenue for not delivering networks quick enough, or we'll simply choose another route and do that earlier. So the key in this is actually planning ahead, that knowing if one of your routes is going to get squashed by a land agent or landowner, then just do something different. So core network is ultimately extremely important, and delivering the core way ahead of delivering distribution is also important. And that's really how we're doing it. So the reason I talk about granddaddy rights on wayleaves is that it comes down to the distribution elements. You know, we've got pockets of customers who there is absolutely no other way of delivering to them other than flying a fibre across someone's garden along with the 19 other cables on the poles that are there. And you know, the landowners won't allow it. They say they don't like the neighbours or sod them. There's nothing we can do. And so that we're looking to, and without serving code, which is expensive and time-consuming and frankly not particularly helpful, you know, we've just got to go through it. And so there are people on the network that have been waiting every year to be connected because their neighbour won't allow something to happen. But there is no way of doing it. You know, we're not going to spend 15 extra grand getting around the corner to do that for them. So yeah, there's things like that. Your other question about overbuild, it's not so much that it's, you know, it's a point of principle that says if BT have gone to the government and said, hey, make 5 billion available, we'll do the deal with you and we'll get it done, which I suspect is how it's come about. 5 billion came from somewhere, didn't it? So, you know, why did BT need 5 billion? BT need 5 billion, and they won't deliver all the areas that we're going to deliver to. You know, we talked about all these issues. You know, they need to build for £400 or less out of their own pocket, otherwise they can't afford their pension liability, right? And so they need some form of subsidy against anything above £400. So that PIA piece, if you try and deliver a network where PIA will allow you to deliver for under £400, you'll have BT poaching. Okay, that's basically how it's working. Anything above that, they can't afford to do at the moment without massive subsidy from the government. So what we should be saying is actually, if you're promising to overbuild everywhere regardless, then you shouldn't get any subsidy, full stop. Okay, that's how you stop the overbuild. Okay, and you encourage it to say, well, okay, we won't overbuild, but we still want the subsidy to go to these places. Okay. And then you leave that overbuild for a number of years to encourage more people to put money into building networks, and then secure the investment that's going in there so that BT can't come along, and surreptitiously do things like, well, why don't we change our pricing here? They're trying to get the Area 3 to have a different pricing regime to anywhere in the country so that they can go to the Isle of Wight and say, yeah, okay, we're going to be, 50% cheaper than we are on the mainland. Well, welcome to the world, John. We're going to do for you like that, and see what happens. And therefore, sell TalkTalk and Sky a wholesale product for £5, where elsewhere it's more expensive. And that being a temporary measure, I mean, it's a possibility, and it's something that we really absolutely need to watch. So, how do we encourage faster build and not overbuild? You simply put a tariff on the subsidies that are being provided, and say, here's how you have to operate. If you accept the government's money, then you've got to encourage other people to build networks as well by not overbuilding networks that have just been built that are probably better than yours. How you legislate for that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that in terms of how do we encourage this almost sort of forced collaboration of reaching out into new area rather than all scrabbling to overbuild the same areas?
I think there's a natural market. I was involved in the cable industry in the 1990s, and we did, rather than PIA, we physically built. We built 4 million premises across 6 years, along with another major CP of the time. I think what happens is that there's a kind of a natural part here as well, that if you're the second game in town, you might get you've got a chunk of the market. You don't necessarily want to be the third game in town if you've got extremely expensive build. So I think it kind of naturally pushes people away if you've got 2 players in town. It works a bit different, obviously, in urban areas and cities where there's a much bigger market and there's much more choice. But I think what you actually do is if you start determining exactly who's going to be in a rural area, there ain't going to be many players.
2 parts to that. Yes, so how do we encourage the building areas where the FTIR and others say there should be only one infrastructure? So in the last, the F20 or Area 3, depending on who you're talking to, then how do we encourage efficient build in those areas that will support only one infrastructure? Also, what do we do about wholesale access there? Actually, Tom, your views about wholesale access and CPs on the network.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to go back, I mean, a second to what Stephen's just said about, being, multiple operators in the rural areas. I just don't see it happening. I mean, it's just not. If you're choosing to go to an area and build there, it's going to be expensive anyway. I think it's going to be naturally that you're not going to get overbuilt. I mean, 2 operators, that's fair enough, but any more than that, I don't think so. Wholesale-wise, I mean, if you're looking at what currently exists in these areas, it's not really very usable. If you're delivering next generation access, and wholesale-wise, I mean, for us at the moment, we're our own ISP. So we build and we are our own ISP. Going down the route of offering wholesale, it could be difficult for operators to, pass all the criteria to get to that point, or want to do it, or to access funding to be able to do it. I mean, if you're choosing to build in an area and, you're spending all the money to get out there and you're collecting all the revenue from the properties that you're connecting, that's absolutely fine. I mean, You know, I mean, that's the model that we work to. You know, for other areas building, you know, I don't see that there's going to be a huge amount of choice wherever you go. There's going to be 1 or 2 operators, and that's about it, especially in the deep rural.
I mean, I think from our point of view, like we'd love to be, you know, here building in a very rural area. We also accept that, you know, like Barn, a lot of the places we build, we're likely to end up with a geographic monopoly on a lot of the premises that we operate on. But I think if you look at the rhetoric of everything that's coming out of Ofcom, if we don't sort it out, as much as I love to spend the next 30 years as the only person that can deliver to one of those properties, if we don't allow access, wholesale access as a service layer, I just don't think that Ofcom's going to wear it. And I think if you take a 5-year view, unless we can say that, you know, a build pay for OpenReach to build there, and everyone can have PIA access as well as wholesale access, you know, over that network, or we pay for an INCA member to build there, and you've got a vertically integrated player that's in control of the prices. That's not a parity of infrastructure, and as Ofcom, as far as they're concerned, they represent the consumer. Their duty is to protect the consumer, and unless we get to a point where we can allow that wholesale access, I just don't think they'll support us as a group. And so much as I would love to be funded to build the infrastructure, be the only operator in town, and the only one that people have come to contract with, I think we will end up with an onus on ourselves as operators to allow open access and to allow people to have that option, even if the option is just over the service and who they speak to on the phone.
But I think that's valid, and there'll come a point in time where it becomes applicable. But right now, when we're building in rural communities, we're not an attractive option to another ISP to use our infrastructure on a wholesale basis.
But we can still say to Ofcom, it's available and no one's taking us up on it. But we've made it available, and if people want to, they can. Yeah. When the time comes, we will. But if that condition isn't put on us now, what's stopping someone turning around in 5 years' time and saying, hey, well, to be honest with you, I'm here now, and are you really going to fund someone to go and overbuild 20,000 premises in rural?
We need to be a bit careful there, because the way Ofcom is starting to deal with that is potentially becoming quite harsh, in that if end users do not have effective retail choice, then they will incentivize Ofcom to invest in full fibre in those areas and provide OpenReach. Beg your pardon. Yes, sorry, did I call them something else?
You call them Ofcom.
For some reason I tend to do that.
Yep.
So Ofcom will incentivize OpenReach to overbuild effectively in those areas to provide that retail choice. Ofcom have come down with the decision that essentially at the moment only OpenReach is in a position to offer retail choice, and their view is that retail choice is massively important and should be supported. So Hector, as you say, it becomes incumbent on everyone to actually be able to not just pay lip service to it. Oh yeah, you know, we'll accept CPs if they want to come.
I just want to interrupt you. Ofcom's remit is not only the consumer. Okay, and this is why we've got to look at them in the eye and say, no, you're wrong. Because Ofcom's remit is to encourage infrastructure competition. And you don't get infrastructure competition being encouraged if the regulator is simply saying we've got a preferred bidder and it's the incumbent. So they're a bunch of hypocrites, and you know it cannot be that way. You know, TrueSpeed is an open architecture, right? Anybody can sell their products over us. Come talk to me. We'll give you the keys to the castle, and it's a software-defined network, so we'll sort you out in a way that makes sense to you, right? And it depends on whether the likes of Sky, Talk et al. Want to do that. And I can tell you this idea that a single process actor, because I have been talking to them, and they've all got so many different needs to deliver. They can't have a single process that delivers a product in a certain way, because the TalkTalk product is different to a Sky product, and the way they provision it is different as well. And therefore, you know, the brilliance of having an active Ethernet full fiber network means that they can have whatever they want, and how it's presented at the point of presence in their customer premises is whatever they want it to be. It's a program that's defined, and but to do that is, you know, it takes time and effort.
And I think that's an important point, Evan. It's understanding what the CPs want, the major CPs, and having some sort of standard portfolio of products and services and SLAs that the operators will adhere to.
They're not standard. They don't want to be standard. They want to be their own.
Well, I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, they're all buying a standard OpenReach product right now.
Yep.
Yes,
So,
I understand that, but the so we say the provisioning processes and the software processes that underpin all that process have been designed using that. So unless we deliver an OpenReach standard, which isn't really what I want to deliver because I can do much better than that.
or as INCA is proposing, you know, its own, our own, or an industry wholesale aggregation platform that presents the same sorts of hooks into other ISPs as OpenReach does today, not necessarily to the OpenReach standard, but to perhaps to some new standard that we can all arrive at.
You know, I'm not saying that it's never going to happen, but having spoken to the commercial guys and the leaders of those processes within those companies, they seem less likely to want to do that than just simply stay with OpenReach.
I agree. Sorry, Hector, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think going back to Evan's original point, the point needs to be that just because the big boys at the moment don't want to change to adapt how the market's changing doesn't mean that the OpenReach only option is right. And so Ofcom shouldn't see, just because they haven't changed today, as it not being right. Some new incumbent will come and they will offer, you know, alt-net operators who end up being 40% of the market. And in 4, 5, 6 years' time, they might be a major player. And so I think everyone's exactly right that we have to offer the access. Once we've offered it, if they don't want to take it up, then new players can come in and build themselves up that can take that access. And that definitely, you know, really is the main point.
And I think that issue is, I think, to me at the moment, although I'm a big supporter of retail choice and competition at that level, I think it's been hugely important in terms of the development of the sort of the commercial internet in the UK. I think having full fibre infrastructure available in rural areas is much more important than the immediate niceties of retail competition.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up, you know, the conversations after the points that I raised there, I think absolutely everything you're saying is right. And right now we need to be building quickly, fast, right now. If I was to try and engage with Sky or anybody else, as Evan has said, to try and allow wholesale access into our network, although we are building a full fibre network and it's absolutely possible with an active Ethernet network, no problem. But then, you know, the amount of effort required for someone like us or any other operator to be in a position to offer wholesale that people will take up under let's say a structure that is agreed for all the altnets with INCA of how we would hand over. It's just not going to happen right now. But you know, the concentration must be building that fibre into the ground. You know, the machines need to be active, engines on all day, every day right now to be able to get to the point where we can have that consumer choice at the end point of all the properties.
Yeah, I think that is the point. So, okay. Sorry, Tom, you've given us such a significant answer. It's kind of full stop. Yeah.
Something that Tom said there at the beginning, you know, I kind of try always to work in the here and now and make things better as you can. So if you just kind of consider all the problems in front of you, you won't make any traction. If you work with what you've got, I think there are a number of CPs out there right now that with the right framework, with the right funding incentives, one of those that was there, I was a huge believer in the GVS voucher scheme. People were getting on and getting connected. At the present moment, the timelines for the bigger schemes, which have been made public, the earliest those bigger schemes for the 5 billion will become available are really around about October 21. If anything along the way gets delayed, like the European funding for the state aid, if the system, the DPS system, should get delayed for any reason, we're pushing it on, and then no one will really get started till 2022. We're here now. We need to be connecting people here and now. And when I say connecting, it's also not homes past. I was part of I wrote Homes Past for the industry back in '92, and I did hear someone say today about Homes Past. I can't remember who it was. It was John, actually. That meant a home past. It was a Toby box outside someone's front door that meant you could take service if you want it. So we need to put the right tools in place, and we need them now. We need to mind the gap, because if we're not careful, we don't start for 2 years. So the 2025 objectives will be missed.
That's another important point, isn't it? While we're sort of considering and worrying about what do we do in these areas that aren't competitive and can't support more than one infrastructure provider, because we're not certain about the boundaries and what's going to happen, there isn't the speed and pace of build in the commercial areas, because people think, well, is it commercial? Is it not? Am I going to get subsidy? Am I not? I think we need clarity over that. So the commercial builders can just be quite clear, okay, these are commercial build areas. If we want it on a commercial basis, that's it. There's nothing stopping us getting on and doing this now. So I think that is an important aspect that we need to undertake. Have we got any more questions in from?
I've got something to just comment on, which is going back to the, if I may. James, am I?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Evan. You might need to sort of just come a little bit closer to your microphone.
I was going to say, get the words. Look, this whole Ofcom thing, you know, is probably one of the most serious issues that we have to deal with. Okay, because we can all raise money and we can all build network and we can make it work for ourselves. We can get it done and we can do the things we need to do. We've got different demographics and we deal with our demographics in a way that makes sense. You've got Tom's demographic, which is very different to mine. You've got John's, which is very different to mine, and Stephen's. Well, you know, it's a different process right now, and Hector's got a, you know, probably a similar one to mine, possibly a little more towards Tom's and mine. But so everyone's different, and they deal with things different. But I tell you what, not different is their consumer habits. Okay, and a certain portion of the community, no matter how much you tell them how good this stuff is, don't believe you, because and it's a big portion of the community just don't believe it until they feel it, touch it, and see it, and even then. At least, you know, when you've done extremely well, you know, half of the community still don't believe you. And so, you know, you've got to look at all of the reasons why that is. And part of it is price comparison websites and the manner in which the bollocks that they pushing out the door about comparing prices and giving you the best deals and so. They're just, you know, money supermarket, really. What is that for? Well, it's to make a certain person rich. It's got nothing to do with giving people better deals, you know. And I don't see any of your companies on those price comparison websites. Why not? Doesn't it tell you? But 90% of people who are ambivalent, 95% of people who are ambivalent about the internet will go to price comparison website and do their deal there. And then it gets broken out by a certain proportion against Sky, Talk, Virgin, or wherever else, and BT, etc. You know. And that's how it works.
Firstly, is Ofcom are recommending some of those websites on the
absolutely,
website.
And they are money-making machines. They're run by about 4 or 5 people, and they spend millions on advertising. Come to my website, you're going to get the best deal. Really, you know. So we need to look at that as a way of. But I tell you what, we all need to do is we have to educate people. Okay, we have to educate on a common platform as to why. You know, what we're delivering is better than anything that's going to be delivered by the incumbent. And the competition is important. You know, I don't mind having a network where I'm, you know, in competition with BT, because it gives people a choice. But the choice that they need to have needs to be loud and clear. And I need to be flexible enough to get ports sold to the likes of Sky and Talk, because frankly their advertising budget's huge and they're going to take 35% of the market no matter what's said and done. Okay, and that's how we need to work this through. And unfortunately, they're the kind of companies that want a very specific piece of integration, and unfortunately we don't have the same kit. And therefore integrating is going to be at our expense, not theirs, and they're going to set the standards of the integration that they require. And we have to fall in line with it if they want to, you know, commit to buying 15% of your network at any given time. So
yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, Evan. I mean, it's one way, you know, we're not on any of these, and for the points that you just raised, the way we get around it, and I know communities are different everywhere, is you send somebody to go and talk to them, and it's a long drawn out process of education.
I get it, and that's why I said, you know, our demographics are different. You know, your communities are much more sociable. You know, I'm going to communities where neighbours don't know each other.
Right, fair enough. Yeah,
so,
I mean, the other point to make here is that you know, estate agents and the data that they get as well. You know, we have to forcibly get our data in there, otherwise they just will never see it. So it's, you know, selling houses and bringing new people into the communities. They just don't see us as an option unless we actually force ourselves in there.
So, I mean, I think from my point of view, I mean, Evan, we're talking about a problem here, which is that the price comparison websites are controlled by people who have got the interest of making money rather than getting people the best broadband. Should we say, right, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Should we say, right, let's start a cooperative website between all of us that gives price comparison to all of our services?
We could do that, but you know what? The survey of hundreds of people that my marketing agency did for me said people, you know, we just paid people to go through a long convoluted process when they're and to make sure they're in the right demographic, all the rest of it. Go and buy broadband. How do you do it? And the first thing they do is go to one of the three that they've heard on the TV. They look at it and go, oh, that's easy, I'll have that. Bam. I mean, I did the same thing, and I tried to buy Sky in my house, and the price changed 5 times.
But you know, these guys have got. If we're all looking at scaling and you're saying, well, the alternative is go on to one of the big three, and what are they going to want? Between 50 and 120 pounds a subscriber they pass through for you. You can put a lot of marketing for that if all of us put everything together and said, right, well, we can put £20 of marketing towards every customer that comes through it. It might not. I mean, I'm only just saying it off the back of what you've said, but it might be something worth considering.
But anyway, it's something, James, that under the regulatory authority of consumer choice needs to be looked at, because consumer choice isn't best served by these price comparison options.
I think the very strong point to be made here is Ofcom, who are justifying their current position around the definitions of different areas and where state aid will go, are justifying that based on the back of consumer choice. Need to, in order to maximize consumer choice, need to ensure that the broadband comparison websites they are recommending on their own website should be inclusive. So, you know, we've gone through the long-winded process of getting on to a couple of those sites. We're not quite there yet. It's not prohibitively expensive, but we're simply not of the scale. The numbers of orders we will give them in a year is not particularly attractive to them, but the reputable ones are doing it because they recognize they have to. Otherwise, they're not a true comparison website. So I do think that we have to bite the bullet and get ourselves on there. And I do think a wholesale aggregation platform, difficult as it may be, there is no way that each of us individually is building interfaces or would even be allowed to build interfaces into Sky, TalkTalk, and the rest. It has to be done on an industry level. So let's, you know, OpenReach will always be OpenReach, but let's have, you know, OpenReach or AltNet Reach too, in terms of aggregation platform that we all subscribe to, and make our combined connections available to those big boys and make it worth their while interfacing with us.
How about we call it Other Reach?
Other Reach.
And choose the font nicely, and we should be about there.
Be really clear. Be really clear on the F20, the BEK funding that's coming along for this last 20%. Very clearly, you need to demonstrate what your wholesale availability is, and you're not going to be allowed to do what you did before on super fast funding, which is simply say, here's a website, log in, place your order. You have to demonstrate that you have a level of automation in there that is similar to that provided by by Openreach, and that simply isn't going to be achievable individually. This wholesale aggregation platform is really, really important for us.
I think that is clear, in that it's part of what is essentially a market failure that has happened over the last 10 years or so. We've recognised this issue that Openreach, or BT, then Openreach, can provide that retail choice, and nobody else achieved the scale necessary to do it. But the independent sector has stayed fragmented. There hasn't been a really genuine attempt for operators to come together, to collaborate, to say, okay, let's aggregate all our numbers. The bigger players, as they've started to come through, who are no longer INCA members, they've started to see that as, oh yeah, we're now getting to a scale where we can start to bring that retail choice. And they've used that as a means of differentiating themselves from the rest of the independent sector. And the reality is that still kept them at a disadvantage compared to Openreach. So I think we need to see quite cooperatively as a sector this aggregation of numbers to come together, as John says, under a wholesale platform, and take those aggregated numbers as the means of engaging with CPs. I think that is going to be our only way of achieving it. Hector's looking extremely worried.
I know. Got you on the screen above my camera, which looks a bit funny.
That's okay.
I think one of the interesting things that we've seen happen in other countries. Sorry, it's Robin. I should turn my video on. Really, there you go. Scalable. Going back to I think what John was saying about integration to CPs, etc. In other countries, especially the Nordics, what has happened there that's made them successful is the industry has agreed together what at least some elements of standardization from a product and service and SLA perspective, and have been talking for a long time about API integration between systems. What really kick-started it was that one of the major CPs in that other country just decided, to hell with this, I'm gonna specify the API that I want, based on standard TM forum type stuff, and they published it, and sure enough, everybody said, yeah, that looks good to me, let's use it. So it's almost a case of someone making the first move and stating what the requirements are, and then it gives a chance for other people to say yes or no, or let's just go with it. I think that seems to have worked quite effectively, and hopefully will in the UK as well. And that's something that INCA is looking at least from the standardization perspective. But it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Okay. My other concern then, we've got Tom from Barm, we've got Evan from TrueSpeed, we've got Hector from Wessex, John White Fiber. So we've got people here who really have focused on what we're now starting to see at this sort of Area 3 or F20, the sort of the more remote rural areas, and you've been successful in creating fantastic networks in those areas, but there's really quite a lot of the rest of the UK to go at. What do we do? Do we try and, if you like, replicate what you've done many, many, many times, or scale up what you are currently doing many, many, many times? What's the approach? What do we do?
It's not what we do, it's what individuals will do. Okay, so if you've designed your processes around scaling, then you can scale, but you're not going to scale to an Openreach scale. Okay, so it's being realistic around what it is that we can do, because I can tell you this, it's at the beginning everyone says, oh, it's just about building network, right? It's about putting fiber in the ground and connecting it. It's piece of piss, isn't it? Well, actually it's not. It's actually quite difficult. And
how hard can it possibly be?
It's difficult to build the teams, it's difficult to drive them, and you've got to get to a certain scale before you can attract all the right people in the team to scale properly, right? And I mean, that's where we are now. We've got the right team and everything, the process, the procedures and the kit and everything else to make it scale. So we're going to scale. And we are in the process of doing it. You know, we're coming to the end of our initial funding. We're going to get a big chunk more and we're going to carry on. That's what this is all about. And there's no magic wand that says we can go quicker. Just do this more times. It's just fantastic because it isn't. So each one of the businesses represented here will have a plan that they're working to, and a plan that's workable within what they're doing. And OpenReach will deliver whatever they're going to deliver at the scale that they can deliver it, which is, you know, large. But they've also got to watch out for their pension liabilities. They can't afford to do this. Okay, then, and they can't afford to do it with a 5 billion subsidy either. They need much more than that. You know, and here we are with private equity, private money going into building networks that the country absolutely requires and wouldn't be here. And we wouldn't be here talking about this if we hadn't done this in the first place. Into a landscape of government finance that is bankrupt. Okay, so, you know, is there going to be 5 billion available for this going forward? I don't know. And I don't think we should be worrying about it. I think what we should be doing is securing our positions and ensuring that we're in a good place to access that funding to grow more. But to say, oh, there's 5 billion, I'm going to quadruple the size of my company and go everywhere because the government's offering me money, it's nothing that we should be thinking of doing. I think our businesses are going to grow. They need to grow properly. We need to have sound footing around what we're doing. We need to deliver safe, brilliant networks that we're doing at the moment. Our strength comes from the unity of the people sitting at this table, talking to each other and having common goals and objectives when dealing with Ofcom, when dealing with ASA, when dealing with the government, and having that voice, which we already do have through INCA and as individuals. You know, I'm fully in agreement that we should be looking at an aggregator model for wholesale. I just don't feel, having spoken to the companies that will use it, that will be acceptable to them. I hope it will be, but you know, how we get through that is very interesting. And watching Ofcom for the bias that they have for BT constantly is something which concerns me. I mean, there's been a number of themes here about Ofcom and a kind of sense of process around favouring the incumbent. And then you've got to look at why. You know, why are they favouring the incumbent? Because it's easy. You know, it's easy.
Well, I mean, we are talking to DCMS about this issue of wholesale access and retail choice. And they recognise that it is an issue in terms of the outside in programme, because yes, they want to be able to provide it, but realistically, only OpenReach at the moment is in a position of being able to provide it. So if they want a competitive procurement, then they have to accept the realistic offers that we are making in terms of, yes, okay, let's develop a wholesale platform that over time, and you know, we'll do it as quickly as we can, but realistically it's going to take a while to get that kind of beyond the tipping point of sufficient numbers on it that will be able to attract the big CPs. So there's just a time that has to be taken, but it is the only way, or the only feasible way, if we can offer them a competitive procurement.
How many CPs are there in the country?
With CPs? Several hundred.
There you go.
Yeah.
But there's 5 that have 90% of the customer base.
But I think there was, you know, if you look at where we're coming from, where we're going to, I don't think the landscape of the market today, just because there are 5 that have 90% today, doesn't mean that's where it's going to be in 10 years' time. No. So I think you know, from my point of view, it definitely needs to be saying that we're going to develop a platform. It'll be open access. If the bigger providers want to come to it, that's their problem. We're going to be delivering a material proportion of the country, and you can't be saying that, you know, wholesale access is determined by the fact that the larger players are there, because that's anti-competitive. Like, that's their business decision whether they come or not. With the wholesale platform, they can come to it if they want to, and we believe that over the next 5 or 10 years, if they don't come to it, they're going to be materially smaller businesses with very smaller percentages of the market as a result, and we'll find new innovative businesses who want to come to it. You know, HMV doesn't exist anymore, but they used to be nearly 100% of the music market. Doesn't mean that they will be in 10 years' time.
I think that's interesting. I mean, for some years, Barry Ford has been saying, you know, this is the time, the end of the ISP. There is no need for ISPs anymore, no need for CPs. You know, people can go and get what they want from the internet. And it's one of those odd things about all innovation. People massively over exaggerate what will happen in the next 5 years and massively underestimate what will happen in the next 20 years. So I think what you'll find in about 5 years from now, there'll still be roughly 5 big CPs. And in 20 years from now, they probably won't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So somewhere in the middle, something very different. It might just be quite sad if they go down to just a different 2 or 3, which I think would be huge, but a bit disastrous for and disappointing for us all. Or it might be down to you know, sort of multitude or almost the end of the CP, and you just go and get what content you've got. We've got a question from Aidan Paul, which I haven't read, but Aidan usually has good questions, so let's go. I agree with Hector, but Ofcom believes it is better to have customer choice and have the chilling effect of overbuild and customers denied fibre. As Evan said, it is largely Ofcom's laziness, was ever thus. Thank you, Aidan. Yes, you're absolutely right, but I'm not sure there's much. Yeah. Okay. Where have we got to? I think we still have that interesting issue. I did some calculations on, I did a network design for, well, from Northern Ireland for the full sort of GPON build there. And I compared the build required for that compared to the fibre build required to FTTC. So obviously in FTTC, you need to take fibres out from the exchanges to the green cabinets, and then you pick up the existing copper from there for the final access network. Most of the build requirement is in that bit from the green cabinet to the end property. And I actually worked it out. That is 15 times more in terms of kilometers than the build from the exchange to the green cabinet. And I assume something like 60% take up in that. So we've got roughly 15 times the build in terms of kilometers of fibre that has been undertaken in the whole of the BD UK programme up to now.
I don't understand it. What you're saying, fibre from the exchange to the street cabinet?
Yeah, if you look at the sort of the tree formation of your network, you've got fibres coming.
Like James.
Sorry?
We don't build networks like that. Okay, we build networks on a core that go to cabinets, and our cabinets are effectively the exchange.
Yeah, but you then need to come out and branch out to the individual properties. Yeah, where you start branching out to those individual properties, necessarily you just need more kilometers of fibre than you do in that aggregated build to the.
Taken into account the fibre that gets to feed the exchange in a BT scenario.
Yeah, I agree with Evan here that, you know, the way that we're building networks is fundamentally different. You know, the spine is different. You know, the trunk and the distribution is completely different. And I mean, in a BT model for us, our core follows the properties, and so you know you're not really having to spur off very far. You're actually building your trunk along and following where the properties actually exist, and that's very common. Will be very common in rural areas.
In rural areas, yes, indeed. Yeah.
Kind of a follow-on question, slightly related, but it's more about what's coming from BD UK Next, which is the access to infrastructure. And this is something that they've got a call for evidence out on. But I think it was mentioned earlier on, I think by Stuart. Yeah, he's nodding. It's supposedly meant to open up utility infrastructure for use by altnets or anybody for that matter. But it doesn't specify. So actually it's kind of a double-edged sword in that effectively anybody could and should allow access to their passive infrastructure, the ducts, troughing, trenches, etc., to anyone that asks this on a reasonable basis. I'm just wondering what the potential impact of that is. There is a call for evidence out, and one of the answers of refusing access, potentially refusing access, is either that you've got plans to use it already yourselves, or that you have a suitable wholesale offering in place already. So again, it links back to the wholesale side of things, but this is more about looking at the passive side. So I'm just wondering if anyone's aware of it and what your thoughts are on that.
My understanding is the Act has been in place since 2016.
Correct.
Yeah. For evidence around why isn't anyone using it.
And that's essentially what BDK want to know.
And it is specifically around telecommunications companies having access to other infrastructure, which, given we have PIA for access to BT's Openreach's infrastructure, one assumes that this means access to, I don't know, electricity poles or ducts rather than Openreach's. So, I mean, I didn't even know the thing existed. Thought you went and negotiated individually with the other infrastructure provider. The timelines for making it happen are so long that you know, might as well build it yourself.
Yeah.
Bear in mind that it also means that it may be incumbent on you to allow other people to use your infrastructure.
Yes, that was the point I was trying to make.
The part is, though, that with the Act, it says where you've got space. So all it's going to drive is CPs to start putting in 1-inch pipes rather than 2-inch pipes.
Agree.
Yeah, unless you can establish a suitable wholesale mechanism which prevents that use of your asset.
Or you can consider the way that Openreach has addressed this in the recent past and prevent people from using your ducts.
Mm.
Well, here's I mean, the question I wanted to ask earlier, and it's really of all the operators on the call, and it's one: have you put into your business model a requirement to actually make money on wholesale? Because if you have, you should have. Oh, sorry, if you haven't, you should have. And the idea of spending money to build something that is only used by 30–40% of the people that are there is ridiculous. Maximizing the use. So build a duct so that you could put other things in it. Because in essence, the people who are going to take it off you aren't going to be competing with you in their product terms. They're going to be selling something to the people that haven't bought from you in the first place. Okay, so, you know, just work all that through. You know, I want 100% of my ports used on my network. And if that means Openreach and Talk and Sky and everybody else is on there, pay me some money to use that stuff that I built because I'm an infrastructure company, then brilliant. You know, that's the way to think about it. You know, and that's really where we all ought to be. And if we were doing that and not trying to protect our asset against the incumbent, actually embrace the incumbent and say, yeah, come use my network and sell your BT product because you're only 20% penetrated anyway, then crack on.
And that's probably then where actually most people's fear of wholesale is around the pricing of wholesale rather than the principle of it in the first place.
Yeah.
And I agree that if it's only ever taking up the slack in what you haven't been able to sell to anyway, then it's fine. The nature is, in the end, time is the great enemy of margin, and it will impact your direct sale price if people can wholesale over your network.
Sure, but a smaller percentage of a lot is better than a high percentage of a little.
Yeah, completely.
So you've got to...
In that situation, you're all differentiating on product quality and product richness as much as the infrastructure provision.
You know, those people that hate BT know that their service is shit, but still buy from them, will carry on buying from them no matter what you tell them. Those people that know that they get great local service and a brilliant product and the John Lewis experience when they're dealing with customer care and with the install process, etc., will carry on using it because they'll be loyal to something which is brilliant, and they won't go back to BT because they don't like them. You know, so the whole market is what it is. Yes, you'll have some loss of customers to a cheaper product because they can't afford your product and feel that it's cheaper. But you know, your product's always going to be better, right? Because you'll contend the BT product. Because BT products are contended, whereas yours will be uncontended, etc., etc., etc.
Totally. And coming back to using other infrastructure providers' assets, one of the difficulties I see is the lack of a common language when you get to other utility providers. They have their own descriptors for the way their asset has been deployed how to use it, their own health and safety requirements, accreditations, and it's different for each of them. So it's quite a task to see how you would engage with a range of different utility providers to use their assets.
We do. It just takes time, effort, and people. You've got to just do it. If you want to use it, you've got to pay the price, which is get everybody ticketed, get everybody trained, have people managing those processes, get the contractors to be, on it. It is what you have to do, and it's, you don't argue with the ladies in the DMV if you want to get a license on it, right?
Right.
Okay, I think we need to start to wrap up and actually work out some of the key things that we need to do. We've got two key actions that I think we need to progress. One is this evidence on what Evan called PIA poaching, which I think we should just retain as a theme. So where anybody has got any evidence of that, then we need to know, and we'll be kind of communicating that as much as we can. I think for a wider communication, we might need to think of a term other than PIA poaching, but Rob will have a...
As a first step on that, if you're interested in having a discussion with other people that have similar problems, then let us know. Get in contact with James, myself and Jill, and we'll set up a call.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also, for those that aren't on it, the OTA had also, that some of these conversations have come up in the PIA IWG, and the OTA have actually said, if you've got the evidence, bring it forward.
Okay, so if we can have a bit of a joint communication with us and the OTA, that might get the message out and get the evidence in as quickly as possible. And the other, Hector was talking before about working with the CLA to develop this sort of improved approach to way leaves for rural areas. That's something we'd very much like to be able to support. CLA doesn't want to go to every individual operator and have to sort this out. Let's see if we can collaborate and do this once and for all. Well, perhaps not once and for all, that's maybe expecting too much, but to do the next level of improvement in the way leave process.
To add some weight there, I think we've already discussed with a number of operators who are keen to be part of that as well. And we've also got Charles Trotman from the CLA to say that he's happy to start negotiations on that in July. And we have said that, he said, well, why don't we talk about next year, because I'm a bit busy with coronavirus. And we said, well, next year doesn't work because that's a fifth of the way through the delivery period of full broadband. So with commitment to starting discussions in July and have something largely agreed by the end of the year that we can and so basically for anyone else who wants to be part of that, I think it needs to be operator-led, looking at what everyone's concerns are and what the most important points would be. And I know it's something that CLA want to do once. They're actually a little bit nervous about having us as part of the negotiations, but I think we sit on both sides, starting our Wessex Internet's a diversification project for a rural property of the state, rural property company. So my father sat on CLA board for a long time, and we know them very well. So I think we're reasonably well placed.
Maybe we need to second Hector to the INCA board for a while and let him do it as an INCA board tag rather than as a Wessex Internet. Maybe that would help the CLA.
Certainly interested to have a specific discussion about that, and from anyone who wants to be on board.
Okay. The last one that I've got on my list is much more difficult. And that is, how do we try and look at this issue of collaboration and avoiding overbuild, and how do we do that? I think it would be helpful if we could just set up a bit of some kind of call to discuss that and actually think of practical ways we might be able to do that. Evan, I'll get in touch with you to see if there's anything that we can do that might work on that. I think it's really important. I think anything that we can do to let all the operators go and build as fast as possible and not muck about at the moment with competing to overbuild, I think has to be a central part of how we get to full gigabit everywhere by 2025. If we can't avoid that, we really are going wrong somewhere. But at the moment, all the commercial drivers seem to be forcing Openreach to overbuild other areas before they get on and do their own build first. So we've got to see if we can get around that somehow. And I have absolutely no idea how.
Yeah, well, firstly, government are going to say fuck off to all and every one of us that says you need to legislate against this. I think the only thing that we can do is create the right legislative environment that discourages overbuild by taking away subsidy from other places.
I think the most practical and attractive approach is to make the next £5 billion of outside-in funding supportive of whatever approach is necessary to avoid it. I think that £5 billion potentially gives a huge focus to get all sorts of things done that haven't been done for a while, including wholesale access platforms, wayleaves, all these things. They need to be done soon. So let's take this, by May next year, DCMS is going to be publishing the first ITT. By what was it, September next year, they're going to be signing contracts?
October was, I heard yesterday, October.
October, I couldn't remember September or October. I have a Gantt chart vaguely in my mind, but I can't remember the month.
Who wants to build them? There you go. There's a good ITT. Crack on with it. Why is it taking that long? It's ridiculous.
It's public sector procurement. There's a whole load of fun involved in it.
Yeah, I'm sure they can design a contract that's got close to 1,100 pages of terms in it as well.
Yes, they probably have. They probably have skimmed it down a bit by now. Yeah, you're probably right.
I think that linked to that, the last point for me is we've obviously just had the Ofcom, wholesale fixed telecom market review, which they're not going to publish till early next year. But that's probably one of the most strategically important pieces of policy that's going to be set. That's got a big impact, particularly for the rural operators on the call, with the outcome of what they're going to do there. What's happening, while they're doing the review of that to ensure pressure's kept on Ofcom to understand the INCA call and INCA point of view and keep rural operators in mind? Is that something that more pressure should be put on Ofcom and collaboration with Ofcom, over and above the report, isn't it?
Can I just give you some heads up, and then James can come in and Rob can come in. I was invited to an e-webinar, Westminster Forum, talking to the two MPs that are running basically the MPs committee that looks at the review. The Labour Party's representative used to work for Ofcom and was part of writing the previous legislation. Okay, so she had a very good relationship with the Ofcom lead on all of this, and they had a good old joke and a chin wag formally and publicly, which doesn't bear the kind of scrutiny that I was hoping to get whilst listening to what they were saying. And it's not, it's all friendly. And the other MP from Scotland was just interested in when Scotland was going to get better broadband. So, I've got to look at this with a bit of skepticism and say, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I hope you've all put in your submissions for the select committee for DCMS in regards to all of this, because I think it's extremely important that we put a lot of pressure on the parliamentary processes that are there to ensure that this stuff gets done properly. INCA, crack on, but I'm certainly going to be doing something from the outside as well, and not just relying on one organisation saying this is us and this is what we stand for, because I think we've all got to have a voice. We've all got to stand and go, no, this is not right, and make sure that it becomes a political event rather than it simply being a process event that lets the bureaucrats decide what it is the easiest way down this road to let them choose what they want to do.
Yeah. And on this, I would say that, sorry, Rob, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. INCA, we always submit or try to submit to these sort of call for evidence and whatever, but we're a member organisation and not all of our members have the same commercial model, technical approach, opinion. And so, the INCA view often is a bit diluted and a bit sort of generic. So certainly, I would encourage all members to submit with your own specific point of view as well, because I think that's important.
Yeah, but do feedback to INCA as well. So we have responded to the WFTMR, we have responded to the CMS inquiry, and we've taken into account some of our members' views on that and fed them back. We've got a follow-up with Ofcom coming up in July on our response. And again, if you've got any particular views on that, do let us know. We'll make sure they're taken into account. I think we're more or less.
I think if I'm going to be on that call, I'll need to be careful, won't I?
Yes.
Trying to avoid some of the adjectives of my opinion. Okay, I think that brings us to a close, unless anyone has any sort of particular burning issues to stop everyone getting on their way. No. Okay. Thank you very much. Rob, anything more you want to say in terms of?
Just to say, hopefully we'll see many of you next week at the Designing the Gigabit Nation webinar. Same time, same place, hopefully. That should be an interesting discussion as well. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's come. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to the sponsors.